My dad let my stepmom erase me from our family the second she moved in and stayed silent while she did it. So, at 17, I went looking for the one person they couldn't take from me. My mother died when I was 9. The cancer took her quickly, in a way the adults around me kept calling a mercy. Dad and I lived alone for 2 years after that, and during those 2 years I was the most important person in his world. He brushed my hair before school. He read with me at night. My mom's photos stayed on the mantle, her recipes in a tin by the stove, her wedding ring on his hand. When I was 11, he met Diane at a work event. They were married by the time I was 12. Diane was efficient and warm and had 2 sons from a previous marriage, Owen and Jack, who moved in with their mother. The photos on the mantle got swapped for a new wedding picture. Her recipe tin went into a drawer. His finger no longer wore her ring. Dad never told me when those things changed. They just changed. The first vacation I was not invited on was the summer I was 14. Diane was at the dining table with a calculator and a stack of brochures. "Money is tight this year, honey," she said when I asked. The trip was a week in Florida for her, Dad, Owen, and Jack. Dad nodded along and said it would be a chance for me to spend time with my friends, and that we would do something together when they got back. We did not. The second was a ski trip the next winter. Diane explained while she was wrapping presents that rentals for an extra person would not be fair to ask Dad to stretch the budget. Dad agreed from across the room. The third was a cruise. The fourth was a road trip down the coast. Each one had a clean number attached and a promise that we would do something just the two of us when the chance came. The chance never came. By the time I was 16, I had stopped asking. Vacation photos appeared on the fridge with me missing from every frame, and Diane would point one out and say how cute Owen looked, and Dad would agree, and the conversation moved on. When I was 17, I came home from a friend's house earlier than expected on a Saturday evening. The front door was unlocked. Dad and Diane were at the counter. Their voices were the comfortable kind people use when they think they are alone. "It is just easier without her there," Diane was saying. "The boys feel like they have to perform when she's around. They never get to just be a family." Dad said something I could not catch. "I know," she said. "I know, but she'll be out of the house in a year. We just have to get through it." Dad said something about her being a good kid. "She is, but she's not ours, and the boys deserve to grow up feeling like this is their home." Standing in the hallway, I waited long enough to hear my father say nothing. The next morning, I made coffee like I had not heard anything. The thing I went looking for that week was my mother's address book. It had been in a box in the basement since the year Diane redid the cabinets. Inside the book were names and phone numbers in my mother's small, careful handwriting, and one of the names was Rebecca, my mother's younger sister, the aunt who had been at the funeral and at my 10th birthday, and then nowhere. The number was a landline. Somehow, it still worked. Rebecca cried for 2 minutes before she could form a sentence. She told me she had been writing me cards every year on my birthday, and on my mother's birthday and on Christmas, and that she had stopped getting any reply by the time I was 12. She had assumed I had not wanted to know her. My grandmother, she said, had assumed the same. They both lived an hour and a half away. The drive that Saturday felt longer than the drive itself. My grandmother's house had pictures of my mother in every room. My grandmother was small and sharp-eyed and held my face in both of her hands for a long time before she said anything. They fed me soup and told me stories about my mother I had never heard. 2 cousins I had not met sat across from me. An uncle who was a terrible cook had brought a casserole. They asked me to come back the next weekend. The next weekend I did. The weekend after that too. Nah. By the time I graduated high school, I was driving to my grandmother's house every other weekend. Dad knew I was visiting friends. Diane assumed I was avoiding her, which she preferred. The college I applied to was 40 minutes from my grandmother's house. Dad offered to help with the move, and I told him Rebecca was driving down. His hand stopped on the doorframe and the color went out of his face. Behind him, Diane set the itinerary down on the hall table without a sound. He said very quietly, "How long have you been talking to her?" He asked it again, louder, his voice cracking. "How long have you been talking to Rebecca?" It wasn't anger. It was fear. "Over a year," I said. "Every other weekend." His jaw tightened. Diane stepped into the hallway behind him, her arms folded, and said very carefully, like she was choosing each word from a list, "What did Rebecca tell you about us?" I looked at her. "Rebecca didn't tell me anything about you. She didn't have to." Diane's mouth opened and then closed, and for a second she looked like someone